Mountain, Island, Lightning Bolt, Spell Pierce, Switchblade, Stab Wound, Red Mage, Blue Mage.
I'm gonna crack open the soda. Hell yeah. Take it away, Kenny!
Welcome to Red Mage, Blue Mage, a very special edition.
What's special about it?
Nothing really. I did more research than I normally do for one of these episodes. That's kind of special.
Did you do research or did you do research?
I guess what's your distinction between those two?
Well, I did research for food. I didn't really do research for food.
If that's the distinction, then I did actual research.
I mean, it's still research. I looked for things.
It's interesting because the topic today is your idea.
Yeah. And I didn't want to look it up or think about it.
Right. So I end up doing the work, which is fine. I'm sure our listener can guess what the topic is based off whatever brilliant title that I slapped on after we got done recording. But what is the topic? What did you want to learn about today?
I want to learn about the reserve list. To me, it sounds exclusive, like a club, like you get a card that says, I have access to the reserve list, and it's like a black card made of metal, and it has...
With no text on it.
No text on it. No, there's text on it. It's on the back, and it says, reserve list.
It sounds like a platinum membership of some kind to you.
Yeah, like, ooh!
Sounds like if you... Back when you could go on airplanes, your clear level, Scientology level rewards.
Yeah. Ooh, she's on the reserve list. So to me, it sounds fancy and like something you want, but I don't think that's necessarily true.
So yeah, maybe we'll start just briefly. Me asking you, what do you know or think you know, or what do you guess about the reserve list?
My guess about the reserve list is that it's something being held back, that they aren't printing anymore, that maybe one day they could reprint, but they're holding it in reserve.
That's a good starting point, I think. I think you have the general idea, but there's oh so much to talk about.
Well, let's talk then. History.
Our story begins with a little indie company called Wizards of the Coast, and it's a bunch of math nerds making a nerdy, mathy little game set in a sort of generic Lord of the Rings setting. And little do they know, as they're creating this game, it's about to explode in popularity and become huge, gigantic.
Right, because who knew that putting numbers on elves and then mathing elves together would become so damn popular?
That's the secret. So the first few sets come out, they, word of mouth, they start selling... Because the whole idea of Magic originally was like, it was something to do at cons while you were waiting for other things to happen. Mm-hmm. So you could play some quick games. So it sells like hotcakes. Imagine in the montage in your mind, like a Willy Wonka-esque scene where kids are running to the store and like grabbing and like there's empty shelves. That's the situation for a while with Magic. Because they did not expect, nor did they have the capability of meeting the demand that was there for the cards. Okay, so that goes on for a little while. And eventually, players are in a situation where they need cards. They need these cards to play Magic, but you can't get them anywhere. So there's demand for reprints, which they finally do in two sets called 4th Edition and Chronicles. Now, like Magic is the very first trading card game. And so they don't really, and it's a small indie group, and they don't know what they're doing, really. Yes?
Is that a true statement that they're the first trading card game? Because
I believe
baseball
so.
cards had been around.
But that's not a game.
Yeah.
Those are just collectibles.
Yeah.
They are not. There's not. That was the innovation that Magic had, was making it a game.
All right.
Anyway, what is important in what I'm saying there is that they didn't know what they were doing. This small indie company that's trying to, and so what they do is they flood the market completely with these cards, and so the value of the cards drops dramatically. So your Black Lotus that used to be, I don't know what it was going for at the time, but your Black Lotus that was going for a few $100s is now half or less. It just dropped a lot. And this sparked a lot of outrage in Magic players, particularly in collectors, who saw their rare cards just dropping like crazy in value.
Man, collectors, what a pain in the ass.
Okay, so I see where you're landing in this already. So what Wizards did, because this is early days in Magic, and other games that existed around the same time or like started popping up in the wake of Magic, they go under very quickly. And so it looked like that might happen to Magic. So what they do is they come out with a policy that says, we understand, we are sorry that we caused this upset. We want you to have confidence that your cards are going to retain value. And so we are introducing a list of cards that we promise never to reprint in black or white border with the same exact game functionality ever again. This is the reserve list.
Okay. I have issues already. I mean, I already have issues. I've always had issues, personal ones. But with this topic at hand.
Okay.
So, collectible cards have been a thing. I mean, there's been collectors since time immemorial.
Certainly.
I want to keep a bunch of rocks that look like the heads of cows, because that's my whole deal.
Sure.
I like pins of, like, presidents. That's my deal. And then you have baseball cards that are very collectible. And these are things that are made as, like, one-off. Like, we run a print, and we go, but you just like look at them, or you put them up on a board, or you like, I don't know, wear them on your hat,
sure,
or show them to your children, whatever.
Right.
That's all well and good, but my problem is you're making a game that is being played through I mean, of course I didn't know this, right? Potentially through decades.
Right.
And so for me, it becomes less of a collectible card game and more like a trading card game.
Right.
Or just a game that you would buy expansion packs for. So I feel like there's a very weird sensibility that Magic the Gathering, or even just trading card games, have in general, where it's like, hey, we're doing this limited run, or we're doing a run of X. It's a game, but these are also collectibles.
Right.
Weird.
I think you've hit the nail on the head already, in that these are game pieces. You want players to play the game, and so making cards that you can never reprint creates a problem just straight away.
I mean,
so,
I'm trying to think of like a good example of it. It would be like, I don't know.
Well, there is actually like good examples of similar collectible things. It's like that bourbon that we listened to about on that one episode of Criminal, where there's sort of an artificial rarity to it. That is it. Pappy Van Winkle, Pappy Van. That sounds right.
Pappy
I was going to say
something.
Pappy Vanderbeam, which is not right. But it changes it from something that you just enjoy, as the product is intended to be enjoyed, to just this collectible thing. It abstracts it, right?
Right. I think that's why this topic interests me, why I wanted to talk about the reserve list to begin with, is because it is a part of my brain that I can understand from, like, if it's on paper, and how humans behave with, like, when they think they got something special and it's a society communal, like, thing, but why I, Amber, don't have that inherently like part of my personality. I don't get it for myself. And so that's why I look at things like the reserve list or for instance, I had a good discussion today. I know we just released a couple weeks ago the the MCU episode, and I'm getting close to finishing the series now, MCU. I just watched Infinity War last night, which love it. And then I tweeted about it, and then somebody was talking about their experience watching it as it was coming out and what it was like in the theater. And just for a second, I kind of felt some FOMO, feelings of missing out. Like, oh, I wish I could have watched it in the theater with people because that would have been a fun experience. But it doesn't bother me deeply, you know what I mean? And so I think the same thing with like cards. Like if I hadn't have gotten the Secret Lair exploding goblins thing, I don't think I would have been sad about it.
Right. So there is that. There's that angle. And then the other angle is not just like collectors who, because that's one part of it. It's people who would like put it in a frame, put it in a box, like to take out and look at, and that brings them some amount of joy. But then the other part, which is I think what you're talking about, and then there are people who treat it as an investment, right? This is locked away. This is accruing value. It's a whole other thing.
And it's why it's also intriguing to me is because it's value based on a group's unspoken agreement that this has value.
But that's everything.
Shut up! I know.
That's cash, that's credit, that's Bitcoin, that's most things, that's gold, It has value because we agree it has value.
Yeah, I know.
Not to say that's not interesting. I think that is interesting.
I was trying to be deep and profound, Kenny.
I mean, you are. I think you are. Like, you're hitting on something important, which is that these things have value in the same way that other things arbitrarily have value.
But why
this isn't exactly arbitrary because... Yes?
I said, but why don't Beanie Babies have value anymore?
People stop thinking they're cool, Magic, a big reason, there are different reasons that cards take on value, but an important one to me is that people play the game. Black Lotus has so much nostalgia, but a big part of that is that it is so good in the game.
I'm making a prediction right now.
Okay.
That Beanie Babies are gonna explode again in the marketplace as collector items, because I feel like these 1990s kids, these 1980s kids, they're getting to be in their 30s and 40s.
That's interesting.
And Jenny Nicholson's about to drop a Beanie Babies episode on YouTube, so I'm waiting for it.
It could be. Pokemon cards are like popping off in value, or had been for a while, so that's kind of a similar thing. Anyway, so back to our story, our history. New sets come out since they announced the reserve list, and they add cards to it from these sets, until eventually the list grows to be about 572 cards in total. So they announced the reserve list in 96. They keep adding cards to it, and then in 2002, they make some changes to the reserve list. First, they say, after this, we're not adding any more cards to the reserve list. That's it. And second, they took off a big number of commons and uncommons from limited edition from the reserve list. And this is a quote, because of overwhelming public support for this change. So basically everybody said, you can take these off the reserve list. It's fine. No one cares. Just give us these cards back. So they do that in 2002. And then it's not until 2010 that we get another change. And in 2010, Wizards tries to use a loophole in the original policy that they made for the reserve list, like the announcement of it. They said, remember, they're not going to release any non-premium versions of these black and white cards on the list. But that lets them make premium versions. So they release from the vault, and they print 4 cards from the reserve list in there in a special foil treatment. And there's, quote-unquote, a large backlash when they do this, when they print some cards from the reserve list. Now, people can have discussions over how big was this actual backlash. Was it really, were the players actually mad, or was it just collectors that were mad about this? Who knows? But after that backlash, they amend their policy to say no premium versions either from the reserve list. And that's the state of the reserve list today.
What were those 4 cards?
Mox Diamond, Karn Silver Golem, which is hilarious to me, Memory Jar, and Masticore, which is also hilarious, because Karn and Masticore are not very good cards.
But it's the premise. It's the principle of the matter.
Right, and the precedent that it sets. Now you've got these collectors being like, what are you going to print next, huh?
So what do you think about the reserve list, Kenny?
Well, that's interesting because that takes us right to our next segment.
Perspectives.
So I will give you a few different perspectives, and then you and I can talk about where we sit among these, okay?
Okay.
So perspective 1 is a lot of collectors are like, yeah, hell yeah, reserve list, keep my cards accruing value. Okay, that's pretty boring. That's an obvious place. Position 2. I will call this the reserve list is bullshit perspective. And I think a lot of players hold this perspective. So, here are the ideas behind the reserve list is bullshit. Number 1, this concern about if we reprint these cards from the reserve list, that your Alpha Black Lotus or whatever is going to drop in value is nonsense. That card is still going to be highly valuable, highly collectible. Me printing, so for example, Soul Ring wasn't reprinted for a long time. That's an Alpha card. And eventually, in the Commander sets, they reprinted Soul Ring, and they've reprinted it tons of times now. If you go onto a site, you can get it for a couple bucks. But Alpha Soul Ring is still, I have a link here, let me see. $3,500 for an Alpha Soul Ring. So the argument for this side of things goes, reprinting these cards is not going to suddenly turn your Alpha Black Lotus that you've held on to for 10 years into a worthless piece of cardboard.
Because there's still a social signifier in I'm holding an Alpha Black Lotus. Also, yes, exactly. To note, not too long ago, as of time of this recording, maybe like a few days or a week, a Black Lotus sold for $500,000.
Right.
Which is pretty disgusting in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. This side of thinking also thinks that, Wizards was this small indie company, and they were just trying to figure out how this all worked when they made the massive blunder when they did Chronicles, the thing that got them to make the reserve list in the first place. They've learned a lot since then about how to control the flow of cards so that it doesn't just tank values of cards. So it's probably, they would treat it the same way they do fetch lands. You'd see these cards get printed occasionally. So the concern's that they're just going to, all of a sudden, you won't be able to walk outside without slipping on a pile of Moxen. It's like a sky is falling kind of argument. They would also argue that the reserve list is a huge, huge barrier, and this is true, to playing Eternal formats like Legacy and Vintage. Because you need Mox, you need Lotus, you need Dual Lands, you need all this stuff, and it hasn't been reprinted since those first sets came out. So it's incredibly expensive to get into. Prohibitively expensive for pretty much everybody. The other points, in the changes that got made in 2002 and in 2010, there was no legal action taken by any collectors against Wizards. And a big thing that people guess is that Wizards doesn't want to make cards from the reserve list because they're worried about legal action taken against them if they would do so. But the people who say the reserve list is bullshit would say, you already made some changes, so clearly it's not written in stone, and nobody sued you then, so what are you worried about? So that's perspective 2, I guess, because we already did the collector's perspective. And by the way, I'm not trying to say collectors unanimously agree with that position. I'm just saying there are obviously collectors who want to see the reserve list stick around. And then the other perspective, the final perspective I'll talk about, is that Wizards' hands are tied. They can't get rid of the reserve list. Okay? So the argument here is, for them to go back on the reserve list and print those cards is very high risk for them because of the potential for lawsuits, and not really much reward as far as they're concerned. Sure, they could print these cards and sell some packs, but they're already making record sales. So why take the risk of opening yourself to a lawsuit worth millions, potentially billions of dollars, if it's not going to get you that much? So, those are the broad perspectives. What are your thoughts right now?
I think if we have dedicated podcast listeners to this show, which, by the way, you should talk to us on Red Mage, Blue Mage, Twitter, or whatever if you have social media, because I would like to know that someone is listening to this. But I feel like if they,
by the way,
what's that?
At Red Blue MTG.
Oh, I've never gotten it right. What was it again?
At Red Blue MTG.
Say it again for the third time.
At Red Blue MTG.
There you go. If you've been listening for, which is now, I can actually say, over 100 episodes.
That's right.
You know that I'm a Chaos Goblin through and through, and I don't care. That's the thing. It's for me, because I'm such a casual player, and because I don't really buy into the collectible finance side, that's not my jam. Of course, I'm well, whatever. You're a company, and these are your cards and your copyright, and you're allowed to make business decisions that you deem fit. And if you want to get rid of the reserve list or print special editions or do whatever, I mean, hell, like you said, there's still that social clout of, I have an alpha Black Lotus. It's still a collectible, highly prized, sought after card, right? That's not going to go away if they make a 2021 Black Lotus or 2020, whatever, you know what I mean? It's you have the original Black Lotus. And so from there, it's you're at this point owning an artifact of time, right? So cool. I think that still has value. At the same time, that's that one side of me. Whatever, you guys, Wizards, you can do what you want to do. It's not going to hurt me because I'm not that invested in many aspects. So I think that's my perspective, right? However, I do understand the third perspective of where it's why even get rid of it? Or why would you do it? Because there's no real benefit to you right now as a business. And so to me, it's okay, cool. Then just keep the reserve list, and just go on with yourself. Do what you, just keep making Magic the Gathering, because it's obviously a highly popular card game, and people play it in so many formats and so many other ways that they don't necessarily need to play with these other formats that are older. And if you want to try to play with a Black Lotus and you're doing casual stuff, why not just do proxies? That's a thing.
Yep. Yep.
So my viewpoint is whatever.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't really have a personal stake in this fight. I find it very interesting. I think it would be super cool if they printed dual lands and Moxen and stuff, and I could get them from my commander decks or from my cube. But the fact that they don't means exactly like you said. I'll just proxy them, and that's fine. That doesn't bother me that much. So the rest of it just comes from just general interest in the topic, and I fall in the same camp where I just think Wizards made this policy at the time they did, and I can't really say whether it was a good or bad decision, because it very well may have saved people's faith in the game at that time, in a very unstable time in Magic's history. And now the game's been around for 25 years or whatever, and so I can't say that was a bad decision. but now their hands are kind of tied because of that decision. So I don't see a way for them to get rid of the reserve list.
I mean, my problem is like Magic's been around for like 25 years now, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And times change. So it's like I, as a human being, understand that nothing is truly ever set in stone, and that if changes come, changes are going to come. And it wouldn't, even if I was invested, I don't know, it depends. I can't imagine it because I don't have that brain. I don't have that mindset. So I don't know. I'm kind of speaking out of my ass right now. I don't know. I mean, the Constitution has amendments. And it should be amended further, I say. Oh, no!
Another excellent unintentional unconscious bridge to our next section.
It's the law!
Chung chung. Okay, so this was the most interesting part of the research to my mind, because in watching videos from various MTG personalities, your professors, your Pleasant Kenobis, your Alpha Investments, so on and so forth, everyone brings up, Wizards doesn't want to move away from the reserve list because of something called Promissory Estoppel, which is a legal term. And everybody's throwing the term around, and I was like, what is this term really? So I did some research on it. And the main source I used was a lawyer, a YouTube lawyer named Lear Lesser. And his channel is YouTuber Law. And he does digital law, tech law mostly, but he had some users who alerted him to this story, and they were asking him, what are your thoughts on this? So he gives a brief summary, and then he talks about what he thinks the legal ramifications are. So first of all, just a definition of what promissory estoppel is. So promissory estoppel is different from a contract, or like a breach of contract. A contract requires an offer, acceptance of the offer, and something called consideration. So offer and acceptance, that's obvious. Consideration is the answer to the question, why is each party entering this deal? What are they getting from the other party in the deal? And promissory estoppel is different because it has offer and acceptance, but no consideration. So if an example I found was like, if you and I are walking next to a jewelry store, and you say, oh, look at that necklace, that's so pretty, but it's so expensive. And you're like, I have the cash right now, but I don't know if I should do it. I say, oh, go ahead and get it. I'll pay you whatever you spend it back as a gift later. And you go and get it, and then the next day I'm like, I changed my mind. I'm not going to pay you back. That's promissory estoppel.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. So we'll come back to that because he was looking at potentially bigger things first. So first he said, is there a contract between Wizards and the people who bought these cards, who have collected these cards? He said, if this were a digital product, this would be a totally different situation, and it almost certainly would be a contract violation because there is a written thing that you click agree to when you interact with a digital product. But that's not the case here. And he thinks it would be very difficult to prove for this trading card game, for the print card game. Next up, would reprinting cards from the reserve list be fraud? He said for fraud, you'd have to prove that Wizards had foreknowledge that they would go back on their word when they made the policy. And he's like, that would be very difficult to prove. And I think it's extremely unlikely to be true.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know a little bit about stuff. They would have to find it in discovery, which means they would get, if a lawsuit was to happen, they
Documents.
would search records, but it means there would have to be some written or emailed or voice recording or something that says, ha ha, these suckers, they don't know it, but we're totally going to reprint it anyway, which doesn't exist anywhere.
In 20 years. Yeah, so he's like, it's not that. And so that brings us to, is this promissory estoppel? So there are 3 criteria to make a case for promissory estoppel. You ready?
Yep.
1, there needs to be a clear and ambiguous promise. 2, the collector would need to have reasonably relied on the promise in making the purchase. And 3, as a result, the collector needs to have suffered loss. Now, he says criteria 1 and 2 are slam dunks in this case. There is a clear and unambiguous promise. It's online. You can read it. And 2, anybody who invested or bought cards based on this promise, anybody who bought cards in those years where it existed, are relying on it. And so it just comes down to, would they suffer a loss? So it just comes down to, if they printed these cards, how much would these values go down by?
Right.
And who knows? He concludes by saying he imagines that the Hasbro General Counsel would be advising, don't print these cards. And I agree. Like, if you look at the criteria for Promissory Estoppel, 1 and 2 are already met. All that needs to happen is that these collections go down in value if they reprinted cards.
Right.
Which seems like it would go down somewhat. Maybe not a ton.
Yeah, it would really, really suck if you were trying to sell your Black Lotus and you were in the middle of a transaction and it's like, announcement came out, we're reprinting all of this, and then you lost that deal and essentially couldn't make your money. It's such a weird... It's so weird to me.
What is?
I mean, I suppose just how we value things, like as humans, what we decide is value and what has worth, because like I know for a fact that your cube's insured.
Yeah.
And since you could insure it and you're paying insurance on it, that means it has value, and then therefore if something happens to it, you will be covered the cost via your insurance. And it's just such a weird... I get it. I mean, I get it. It's just like I'm trying to think of what's in my life. Like for me, most of my stuff is sentimental and really has no larger inherent value to society at large, right? Like no one's going to reimburse me for all the shells I have for Sanibel if like a tornado comes and throws them across the Midwest. So it's like, except that there are shells that are rare and do have actual value.
Yeah, very true.
The Genoa shell. That if you find it, you could sell for several thousands of dollars because it's such a rare snail.
It's a perfect example of something that we just agree upon is valuable, and it's scarce, so that makes it more valuable.
I remember one time I found like a shard of one and I was weeping. Maybe I do understand this.
It was a big shard too, right?
I can't remember. It's been a while, but it's definitely like a thing when I go hunting for shells is a shell that I am always keeping my eye out for. But see, to me, that's for me, it's the hunt and the thrill. I guess that's the same with opening packs of cards. I get it. I found it. You just had to say, I just had to come to shells, and now I understand and get everybody's.
Although there's a difference here, and I wonder if this would switch your perspective a little bit, because effectively there is a reserve list for Genoa shells. Like their scarcity is a real thing.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It's not artificial. It's
right.
It's actual natural.
Right. So imagine if suddenly God reprinted Genoa shells, and when you went to a beach, they were just everywhere.
Well, guess what? That's not how God works. And also, if they introduced a large population of new snails to an existing population, I'm sure there's going to be scarcity in another sense, because another snail's going to get fucking eaten by all these goddamn Genoas. And now I have a new scarce shell to collect.
I hate trying to do thought experiments with you.
Why?
It's exactly like when I do it with my students, and I'm trying to get at some intuition, and they're like, why would he park that car on that railroad track? This guy is a moron.
Yeah, give me some real...
Why are those 5 people tied to the railroad track? What were they doing there?
Maybe they deserve to be there.
Yeah. My point is, I think if you had a Genoa shell, you amber, the rarity might make it a little more valuable, but you think it's pretty. Like, it has a lot of value in and of itself, rarity or
Plus
not.
the memory, the discovery, the finding of it.
Right.
Which is the thing that happens in Magic as well.
Yep. Okay, I have one last category for you.
Okay. Fun facts!
So in the course of my research, I just found a handful of interesting facts that don't fit into a category. So I'm just going to list 3 interesting things that I found, and you can react. Okay?
Give me space to react, Kenny.
I will.
Okay.
Fact 1. There are, at maximum, absolute maximum, 1,100 copies of Alpha Black Lotus in the world.
How do they know that?
Because that set, the print run, that's how many there were.
But there could have
And in fact, for any rare in Alpha, there are at most 1,100 copies.
Oh, at most. We don't know if somebody's dog ate one.
There's almost certainly way less than that.
Yeah, sure.
But that's like if they all somehow survive, that's how many there would be. So in fact, there's probably 50%, less than 50% of those still exist.
Yeah. Betcha people are crying like I cry with my Pokemon cards.
That was a wild fact to me to learn. Okay. Fact number 2. This is a quote from the 2002 announcement. So this is when they made an amendment to the reserve list. And this quote was in there. Quote, "We have no plans to take cards off of this list at any point in the future. And we have no plans to put any more cards onto this list at any time in the future."
They just said that we just don't have plans right now to do either of those things. Which,
yeah,
I mean,
it's true.
Sure, I don't plan on doing much tomorrow.
Yeah, it's pretty, this one's very nebulous. This leaves them open to do things. To me, it was interesting because it really points to like the contradiction that is the existence of the reserve list, where it's this thing that we all acknowledge isn't very good to exist right now, but we have no way of getting rid of it, and we wish it were gone, but we can't. It just points to the bind Wizards is in now.
Sure.
And lastly, while I was walking around the house thinking about all this today, I was like, why couldn't they print like an uncard Black Lotus? I don't mean like Blacker Lotus, like a funny spoof version. I mean, why couldn't they print a silver bordered Black Lotus? Or they used to have these, I think they're tournament cards? Can't remember. One of them's in my cube, actually. They used to print gold bordered cards. And on the back, it didn't have an official Magic back. It had like, I don't know, facts and stats or an advertisement or something. Sure. Which is perfect for the cube because who cares? It's in a sleeve. I was like, could they do that? And so I researched it, and Mark Rosewater on his blog got asked that question basically, and he says, "We are unwilling to reprint reserve list cards at normal card size, regardless of border or back."
Interesting.
Yeah, I was
It's
puzzled
probably
by that.
because I would say that could end up for a high level of potential fraud. What do you call them? Fakes.
Counterfeits.
What's the word? What's the real word for it?
Counterfeits.
Thank you. Counterfeit. Yeah, counterfeit card. Because if you really wanted to make a quick buck and you get a Black Lotus that looks like the original Alpha artwork of a Black Lotus, I'm sure someone out there can probably counterfeit that really well by just adding a back to the back of it somehow. Especially if you have printer knowledge, right?
I think that would be really hard with current like counterfeit like
measures.
Yeah, because they have the little holographic thing on there.
Sure, it's still though you're still opening it up for potential.
I suppose so, but that threat already exists. I remember going to a card store and somebody opening up a little case and displaying a full set of the Power 9 in foil. And these are proxy because foil didn't exist in Alpha.
Yeah.
But they looked immaculate. They were beautiful. They're completely flawless. So I don't know if you're really making things worse by doing that. I mean, this just points to what we already said about the legal side of things. sure, that probably wouldn't do anything to the value of these cards. But even if there's a small percentage chance that it might, is it worth the risk to Wizards?
No, it's not. Absolutely not.
So that's the reserve list. Do you have any questions or comments?
No, it's pretty much what I expected.
Does it feel like a special exclusive club?
No, it just seems like a cardboard box in a corner of a musty basement filled with potential that's been ripped to shreds.
Yeah. It makes me sad. It would be very, very cool to open up a pack of vintage masters, or whatever you want to call it, ultimate vintage masters, and be able to open a Black Lotus. Like, we will never have that experience on this world.
No, we won't. And we will probably never. And that's fine, because I got other things in my life. I just going back, though, the one thing that does get to me is that whole, like, this is a game, but also something that's collectible. It's just a weird combination. But I kind of get it, but also I don't. And that's just me in life. So it makes sense.
Yep. I agree. There's something at odds where it's like, we want this game to be popular and we want lots of people to play it. By the way, to play it, you need these, for example, these fetch lands. Oh, but we haven't printed them substantially in years, so each one will cost you $20 to $50. You need 4 of them in your deck. It's like, do you want me to play this game or not?
Right.
Anyway, in conclusion, I think we're both in the same position, and so is our lawyer that we referenced. We, by the way, disclaimer, are not legal counsel, so Hasbro, don't listen to us.
Or actually anybody.
Matter. Well, I mean, this is very specific for Hasbro, but yeah, no one listened to us on legal matters. But yeah, I get where they're coming from. I get why they would not do this. They would not break the reserve list.
They just painted themselves into a corner.
They did, and maybe as one last note, I don't think it's easy to say the reserve list was a mistake.
No.
Because it may have been exactly what they needed to do to save the game. So, I think it just is what it is.
'Tis what it is.
And we are who we are. I'm Kenny. You can find me on Twitter at Wolfmere.
I'm Amber. You can find me on Twitter at Rocket Orca.
You can find us collectively, again, one last time, at RedBlueMTG.
Kenny does all the tweeting.
Mostly true. Until next time, I'll be representing Counterspell.
And I'm searching for that Genoa shell. Bye.
That's a great rhyme.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, bye, bye. I'm on the beach. I'm looking for it. I got my snorkel on. Sand in my swimsuit. Because my ass is dragging along the bottom of the ocean.